Hello and welcome to another fun-filled edition of Adam's Music Box, where today we're celebrating the original release of The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars. And whilst this space age, interesting conceptual album really launched Bowie as an international superstar, he, of course, was doing incredibly artistically valid thought-provoking, beautiful music before, and he had already built up a fan base. So let's look at where he was a bit before this. And I'd like to begin with the song Space Oddity, because this really set Bowie up as a man who stood apart from the pack, a man who challenged perceptions of art, of the artist, and of pop culture itself. When Bowie released Space Oddity, the world was stark raving optimistic about space travel. Although there were accidents like Apollo 1 and Apollo 11, most people were filled with a sense of optimism surrounding man walking on the moon, or so they say. But Bowie instead presented a very melancholic, a tragic look at the perils of space travel, channeling William Blake in many ways in discussing how our quest and thirst for modernity, the K West quest, was actually leading us into some places that were both personally tragic and spiritually difficult. And the song was not only that, but it was also beautifully arranged. The combination of the hard strumming guitars that were overdubbed with one another, the beautiful mellotron played by none other than Rick Wakeman, the saxophone, the whole thing was just really interesting. And of course, this theme of space, it trickled through a lot of his music, Life on Mars, etc. All very, very interesting stuff that Bowie was doing before he decided to take these spiders from Mars and bring them on the road. But this album, the Ziggy Stardust album, really cemented this concept and took it in a different direction. This time, the idea of the spaceman was as a redeemer, someone who would come to redeem the decadent rock and roll lifestyle observed on Earth. And while talking about the rock and roll lifestyle might seem cliche now, it was quite unique for a man who really was a walking art project, a walking piece of art, to comment on these issues from the point of view of a character who was looking down at the earth and seeing what was going on and using the power of art and a spiritual guidance type of mentality to free people from the sort of psychological bondage that they were experiencing. If I were to summarize the concept of this concept album, I suppose that's how I would do it. Musically, it was very layered. It was produced in that classic glam rock sound, but where that sound was so often used for music aimed at sort of teenagers who just wanted to rock out and forget the troubles of the world, Bowie elevated that sound into high art with a little help from friends like the late great Mick Ronson and the late great Trevor Bolder. Wakeman played a little bit uncredited on the album as well. He almost joined the band, but instead at this point decided to go in and join Yes. But this album, in terms of what it did for the artist, it took David Bowie from someone who was mostly big in his home country of England, and it made him an international superstar. And he was someone that never rested on his laurels, which is actually why, in hindsight, I think this album continues to be so important. He was never one to say, aha, I've done the space theme and I've had success with it several times. I'm going to, milk this to death. No, once he reached a certain level where he felt he could do all that he could with his artistic explorations, he just ran that into the ground, invented a new persona, a new character, a new walking art project, a new production style, a new arrangement style, a new approach even to songwriting. And he did that throughout his career, which is why when someone tries to ask themselves or another, what's their favorite Bowie album, it's kind of hard to pin down because which Bowie? He was really a vehicle, a human vehicle for art that took a personified form. But this album is remembered particularly fondly among many Bowie fans because for many, particularly in the US, other parts of Europe, Japan, the wider world, it was the first time they really got a glimpse into Bowie, into both his sound, his image, and for those who saw them live, they became hooked because of the ultra theatricality. And even though he was very theatrical, there was something of a human kindness that always shone through. Even when he was playing his most aloof character, the Great White Duke, there was always something very human and even humane about his approach to these various, sometimes defined, sometimes intentionally less specifically defined characters. And that sort of speaks to the real man behind the art project, behind the persona, because he was a very good man and he cared deeply about the artists around him. Unlike some in the industry, he was a pleasure to work with, according to most of the people that worked with him. He was always giving great advice to people. He chastised MTV famously for excluding a lot of black artists from heavy rotation. At the time, this would have been in the late 80s. And so he was always someone to sort of fight for the underdog, even with his larger than life persona. And I think that that contrast between the characters and the real character of the man is something important. And that's the real soul that I think went in to all of his music. Again, as I said, there really isn't a bad song on the album. Starman is a huge hit. Rock and Roll Suicide is a great way to conclude the album. 5 Years, the sort of slow, almost shuffle, slowed down shuffle type of opening. And then my favorite, Moongate Daydream, which is just a real sort of dramatic rocker that would go on to inspire so many of the more theatrical acts that would continue to emerge throughout the 70s. It's an album that most people have heard, but few people really get tired of hearing it because of the concept, because of the layered nature of the music, because of the personality that the artist infuses into his music. It's one of those albums that can be played again and again, and indeed has been played again and again. So enjoy the breakthrough album that made David Bowie an international superstar today or tomorrow or the day before. Maybe you did. Like, subscribe. We will see you next time. Take care.